that is.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics. Well, I don't know how much politics, but we'll certainly be doing lots of public policy because we have as our guest John Tillman. He is the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. He has been there about 5 years. Before that, he was doing 4 years of advocacy work, related work on the national level. He has taken Illinois Policy Institute from like 2 employees to a major bureaucracy of what, 30 employees or something?
Thereabouts.
But it's truly a very effective organization. There's nobody who's aligned with, I think, the central focus of the Illinois Policy Institute. Well, let me let John Tillman tell us. Because you know, Carol Marin, we're going to be talking about this show on February 6th, and you folks can watch this show. Go to WTTW.com and go to Chicago Tonight and go to February 6th, and you'll see that Carol Marin described the Illinois Policy Institute as how?
A free market organization. We like free people and free markets.
Free market and liberty-oriented.
Liberty-oriented.
And that's
right.
accurate, isn't it?
Oh, that is very accurate.
And
we,
then she
we wear that label proudly.
And on that show with you was Ralph Martiri, and Ralph Martiri heads up the Center, he's the executive director of the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. Ralph's a friend of Public Affairs. He's been on very recently and frequently before on Public Affairs. But how did Carol Marin describe the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability?
There were no adjectives, simply the name.
Now, do you think she, maybe, I'm going to be charitable here, that maybe Carol thinks, since the name itself is self-explanatory, Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, no name is needed.
I'm not sure. The bottom line is we should look at all organizations by the work they do. He focuses on taking more money from taxpayers and promoting progressive tax hike and a variety of other things that benefit many people, including public employees and government unions. We try to protect the taxpayers, and we want to see Illinois become first in economic outlook and job creation.
But
very
John,
different, very different motivations.
Folks, what we're doing here, and this is a little unusual, okay? We're conceding that the Chicago Tonight, and we're somewhat competitive, I would say, with them, that they are the opener. What I look to for Carol Marin is to open the subject. And I'm at Public Affairs, and we're the closer.
Is that right?
Yes, so they opened this subject, and it's an important subject. Actually, the person who opened it was Governor Pat Quinn, because he made the speech on February 6th, and that was on the state of the state, right, John?
Yes, I call it the state of dysfunction, but yes, he called it the state of the state.
John, why must you always be so negative? He's the governor of the state of Illinois.
Actually, the fact is, Jeff, that we have to face the truth. This is a theme I've been working on for a long time. We have to face the truth of our problems, and we are in a state of dysfunction. The same folks who've been in charge of this state, top to bottom, from 2003 on, and long before that, when you go back to Speaker Madigan or the Senate being controlled by the Democrats. And the bottom line is they are failing, and they continue to fail, and his state of the state—
They, who's they?
The people in charge, which would be Speaker Madigan, Senate President Cullerton, and Governor Quinn. They are failing the people of this state. Their recipe for success perpetuates the fiscal and economic death spiral we're in. So we should be very clear and truthful about that.
So you say, is that because you've been talking for much of the last year about pension reform, state employee pension reform? You would say you have proposals.
Yes,
Governor Quinn has proposals. Actually, are they pretty similar? Because Governor Quinn has said we want to increase the retirement age. He wants to increase the retirement age for state employees. He wants to increase the employee contribution. And he wants to do something about COLAs to reduce the cost of living adjustment. Would that be fair? Has he said that?
He said things along those lines. But
and now you generally would agree with those 3 things. And then you can elaborate. Am I right?
I would agree with those things in concept, but it's the details that matter. And the problem with Governor Quinn's proposal or Senate President Cullerton's proposal or the Biss-Neckert's bill, all of which in various forms are being discussed.
Is this Senate Bill 1 or is that different from the
Senate Bill 1? Senate Bill 1 is essentially a hybrid of Neckert's Biss and Cullerton's proposal. Okay. But the key point here is that all of those leave in place the same structural system that has bankrupted the state and is bankrupting the pension funds. It was all, the reset of the pension reform goes all the way back to 1995 with what people call the pension ramp. At the time, hailed by Republican Governor Edgar, Democrat House.
Clarify that.
The pension ramp.
Ramp. R-A-M-P.
Right, ramp.
Because that's something that's been debated and talked a lot about by one of your, competitors, you might say, Ralph Martiri, the Senator Task. So I'm just saying, but Ralph, people have seen Ralph on the show emphasize the importance of that ramp up, and I think he would say you have to reduce that ramp up.
Yes, well, here's the point.
And you want to say?
Here's what I would like to say, is that the ramp failed within 8 years of it being set back in 1995. By 2003, it was already obvious that it didn't work. And it doesn't work because a defined benefit scheme is impossible to predict. That's why 85% of the private sector now has been shifted over to 401ks. Think about what they're trying to do with any kind of defined benefit program, where you promise people a certain amount of money far distant years into the future, 20, 30, 40 years. You work for the government for 20, 30, or 40 years. They're trying to guess the mortality rates of everybody, how long they'll work, what the investment returns in the stock market will be, and predict that they'll have enough money and collect enough money throughout that. It's impossible to do that. That's why the system is going bankrupt and is going to run out of money. All the reforms that we were talking about.
Can I interrupt for just one thing?
Let me just finish this thought. It's very important. All the reforms that are being discussed leave in place that system. What we recommend is abandoning that system and converting to a defined contribution system, along with some of the things that you talked about.
But Ralph and others would say, the problem with the state employee pension fund is not that, I think you would say, it's not what you've said, that this is inherently unpredictable. I think this is how I might describe what you've said. He would say the problem is the state did not put in the appropriate funds that they were obligated to do by the ramp.
That's one of the great myths, and it's very important that we get the truth out about that.
Did they put the funds in or not?
I'm going to answer that question. So the answer is Jonathan Ingram from our staff did the analysis and went back and looked at the original 95 ramp. It turns out the taxpayers through the state have actually put in $8 billion more than what the ramp originally called for. But you don't hear about that,
really?
Do you?
More?
No. And you know why you don't hear about that?
Why?
Because first of all, the taxpayers put in $8 billion more. That's not good for the union side of this argument. But what happened is you can make an argument that the state underfunded the pensions, because what happens when investment returns are poorer than what was assumed, and when people live longer and earn money in retirement longer, you have to reset the annual payment every year from what it originally was set at. And in terms of that, the state did miss some pension payments, no question about it. But that is not the core problem. The core problem is the inherent instability of the whole idea. It's essentially a Ponzi scheme.
So you're saying you have to have something similar to a 401k, whereas the state would be obligated not to have a defined benefit paid out to the retirees when they retire.
At some future distant date.
What they would be obligated to do is yearly, as they're working, put in a certain amount of money and let these people invest the funds as they choose, with some constraints, as they do in the private sector.
That's precisely correct, because that creates predictability. And if I was I don't blame the rank and file workers. I think one of the great tragedies of all of this is that it's really splitting taxpayers from government workers. We don't really want to do that. The people who are accountable for this are the union bosses who sign off on these deals and like the political power associated with them, and the legislature, the politicians who create these deals that are inherently unstable. But they have to be fixed. We have to face that truth.
Now you, on this show, and people want to watch Chicago tonight, I mean, I'm really kidding when we say we're competitive. I'd say we're complementary. And I give Carol Marine a lot of credit for raising these issues. She only has 13 minutes, and she's got 3 people there as guests, 4 minutes each. We're blessed with 30 minutes, and we've got 1 guest. So John can filibuster for 25, and if I'm lucky, I get 3 minutes in, right, John?
I think people have watched your show and know who the king of the filibuster is, Jeff.
But seriously, I think Carol did a good job of raising these issues, and seriously, what we're trying to do is we get to start with that, start where she finished, and now close on these issues, because that's kind of where the show closed. I mean, Ralph was very upset with you because you said, John, I think you said, the constituent groups here, the people who are involved, the taxpayers, the state government employees, and the poor and needy. And you said, in your view, although you didn't say in your view, you said Ralph's organization, Center for Tax and Budget Accountability, focuses on the state government employees. Isn't that what you said?
I said something to that effect.
Yeah. And Ralph got very annoyed by that because he said they are bipartisan, balanced group, and he pointed out to you several well-known Republicans who are on their board, right?
We should go look at who those Republicans are.
You know who they are?
I do
one
know
was
who they are.
what's his name? Shorf. He's a former
yeah, I'm not necessarily familiar
budget
with him,
director of Ed.
But the board chairman is a former state rep,
Republican state rep
Bill O'Connor, who received a tremendous over $100,000 in political donations from the government unions. So they have a point of view there. He has multiple union representation on his board, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Ralph representing the interest of the union point of view and what he would call a bipartisan database evidence-driven point of view. We should just look at what the policies are he recommends. Forget who's on his board. Forget who he says he represents. What are the policies that they recommend or others are recommending versus what we recommend? What we recommend is taxpayers should keep more of their money. We recommend that we should put solutions in place that protect the retirement of those already retired government workers and protect what's been already earned by government workers, but reform the system going forward. And we think we should put a system in place that protects those most dependent on government. And that's what we recommend, is a balanced approach among those three.
That's the issue, and I don't know that that got crystallized. You folks, you should watch that show, February 6th on Chicago Tonight, because I think you've hit the nail right on the head. Maybe we can get these graphics up if we haven't before. In your view, Illinois needs less government spending. That would be the view of the Illinois Policy Institute, right, John?
Of course. The government is spending at a record rate. We spend more money than we've ever spent. We spend more money on a per capita basis, inflation adjusted, than we've ever spent, and we have the 9th highest overall tax burden of taxes paid by Illinois residents into Illinois. So by every measure, we are spending more and paying more. So the balance has to come out of the spending side of state government.
Government spending cuts, that's what we've just put up there. That's what the Policy Institute says. That's the cure for the problem, right?
That's one of many cures.
One of many cures.
One of many cures.
But it's an important cure. It's not a trivial
It's not
cure.
so much spending cuts, although that in the essence of what we're talking about. We have to reform the drivers of spending. The drivers of spending are public employee compensation, including the pensions we've been talking about. The other drivers, of course, are education spending and, of course, healthcare spending, primarily Medicaid. Right. And so what we want to do is concentrate those resources on those people most in need in all of these things and create a fair and equitable system to those three constituent groups I keep referring to. The taxpayers who fund everything, people dependent on government who are poor and disadvantaged, maybe developmentally disabled, and of course the proper role of government on a limited basis. And then be fair to the employees who work on behalf of the state to protect what they've earned but reform the system going forward. We can't have millionaire retirees being government workers, which is what the equivalent is at these retirements.
Are they? Because you know, Ralph points to a very low average. What would you say the average retirement payment is? Average annual retirement payment for state employee. Doesn't he say it's something like 20 or 40,000 or something like that?
Well, yes, and to have
that's not exactly $1 million. You are exaggerating a little bit, John.
No, I'm not. If you'll actually let me make the point, I'll explain to you why it's a millionaire retirement. If you're going to get a $30,000 a year annual defined benefit, you have to have roughly $1 million in the bank to do that. That's what I mean.
Pay that out over
to pay
30
that out.
years or
So
so.
a private sector worker to get a $30,000, a 3% annual annuity from their retirement fund has to have $1 million. The average, and of course they always quote all retirees. So they take the people that work for the state for 2 years, they take the people who work for the state for 10 years, and then they take the people that work for the state for 30 years.
It's the average. It's the average.
But the key point is somebody who works a full career for the state, take a 30-year teacher who retires, they get an average of $67,000, and over the life of that retirement, it's going to be about $3.6 million in payout. That's a millionaire retirement.
But that's not the average of all state employees.
That's the average. That's the average for a teacher who retires after 30 years.
It is because they get something like, is it 75 to 80% of the highest salary for their top 4 years,
right.
something like that?
Yeah. So I've quoted you a good average.
These people are often now in the 80 to 90,000 range. People don't realize in the Chicago public schools, the median salary for an 8-month job is $67,000, right?
No, it's actually higher than that.
Higher than 67,000.
It's about $75,000.
Okay, so
highest paid teachers of large system in the country. Chicago
the median salary.
Teachers.
That means half are getting more than the 75,000, half less. But that's roughly one central.
Yeah, I was actually quoting an average, but we really are into the policy weeds now. People love that.
Okay. Well, no, they do love it. I mean, don't you? Because people say, a lot of people say, the problem with the Chicago public schools is funding. It's unfairly done. The suburbs have more to pay.
They're paying we spend $13,000 on average per student in the city of Chicago. We're graduating 6 out of 10. It's depending on how you slice it.
It's $6 billion budget. 400,000 students, divide 400,000 into $6 billion. You got 15,000. Now it may be slightly lower than $6 billion this year. It's actually may have gone down, but a few years ago it was $6 billion.
The bottom line is there's plenty of money in the system.
Whether it's 13.5
the problem is not
or
a lack of
15,000.
resources.
And that's my point, though. Okay, and that's why when you make light of it and said people really love this, they do. They want to know roughly that we're spending $15,000 per kid per year in the CPS. Now, if you're in Winnetka, the public schools probably $20,000 per kid per year.
That's probably
for K
about
through
right.
8, maybe a little higher. No, so admittedly it's more. And when we say the CPS, that number you and I are talking about is for an average across all grades. And so it might be different if if you took high schools, I imagine it would be a little higher than the 15,000. So it'd be even and if you took grade schools, it'd be a little lower. So the difference may be more significant. So you may be talking 20,000 for K through 8 in Winnetka, and you may be talking 12,000. But still, I don't know that you could make the argument that, John, if you and I were to start a school system tomorrow, and somebody was to give us $12,000 per kid per year, you know, currently the CPS for that money, 80% of the black kids in fourth grade are not reading at grade level. Only 20% are. So John, see this book, Runaway Bunny, which one of my favorites to read to kids.
I look forward to reading that. It's right in the heart of my reading abilities. So
What you and I would do, here we can get a picture of that Runaway Bunny. Can we see that? There we go, Runaway Bunny. It's by Margaret Wise Brown. I should know this, having read this many times to my kids. Pictures by Clement Hurd. Here's what we would suggest, and I'm sure you would agree with me. One of the main ways to improve the quality of reading and the ability to read in CPS would be to somehow get parents or parent substitutes to read to kids when they're a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and see that somebody's carrying a book around the house. And I'm serious, folks. It's almost that simple. I think if we did just that, if we did nothing else, we don't need pre-K, 14,000 a year. All we did is figure out how to get somebody to read one book per day to kids in that age range from 1 to 5. I think we would find the 4th grade reading level would be higher than 20% for black kids, right?
It seems like a very good idea.
The point is, you and I could, for $12,000 a year, I bet you and I in a heartbeat could put together a school system that outperformed the CPS.
Well, your viewers should just think of this in simple. Let's just pick an easy number. Let's pick $10,000 a year per student. Let's have a classroom of 25 kids. That's $250,000 a year. Let's pay the teacher $100,000. Let's get them an assistant. That makes $50,000. That's $150,000. Then you rent a space to teach them. That's about $25,000 to $30,000. You have about another $2,000 or $3,000 annual in utilities.
About $183,000.
So where's the rest of the money going?
$60,000 profit.
Where's the rest of the money going?
Graft.
Right?
No, you see, it goes, where does it go? It goes to graft, because you saw the Sun-Times do this. This was almost criminal, okay? They were focusing just this week. We're taping the show on February 10th. And you can look up who the authors are. Again, it's not being nasty to these people. It's just suggesting that the mainstream media tend not to get at the main point. You saw this article. It was about UNO, which is a charter school system. And they pointed out that they alleged, and perhaps true, that a number of the high-level people at UNO had their friends and relatives getting contracts, okay, to construct many of these buildings that they had almost $100 million to spend on. Now, let's assume that's true. I don't know that it's true. But the first question I would have asked, if I were the Sun-Times, if I were the editorial person actually doing editorials, we had that guy on here. What's his name? Anyway, Tom McAfee, I think, something like that. Tom said to me, "You'll always be in Skokie." And Tom lived in Skokie. I always thought that was so odd. He was like, it was a terrible thing to be in Skokie.
Skokie's a great place.
Okay, so, but the point is, why didn't somebody point out to these reporters that, okay, say there was some slack. Say there was some, did it ever happen in the CPS? Do we ever find any graft going on there? Do we ever find any corruption? Of course. And now the question is, given a certain amount of corruption with, if they want to call it that, in the charter schools with UNO, and again, it's not proved.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
No, but my point is, the main question is, who is performing better? If you found that UNO, and I think there's a lot of evidence here from pulling out our books here, from Herb Wahlberg, School Choice, the findings written in 2007, now supplemented by many more. Charter schools, on average, across the country, in Chicago as well as elsewhere, outperform traditional public schools. And if UNO is one of those systems that outperforms, you know what? I'd say to hell with it. I'd say fine. A little bit of graft going on, a little bit of cronyism. It goes on in the CPS. And say UNO.
You're now advocating for cronyism and graft?
No, I'm just saying.
I'm a little surprised.
No, I'm saying. I'm saying the point is. Here's the point, and we'll give you this chance to read. You read Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman?
I did. I read that to my daughter when she was 2.
Well, your poor daughter. Okay.
I'm kidding.
Have you read this recently? Would you like another copy, or you already have it?
I'm good. I have it at home.
This is
in my
the point
library.
of Milton Friedman and Capitalism and Freedom. He doesn't quite say it this way, and he's now deceased, but great, probably the greatest economist in the 20th century. Yeah. Alfred Marshall was the greatest in the 19th, and of course Adam Smith in the 18th. Do you agree? Adam Smith, Alfred Marshall.
I defer to you.
Friedman. The point is, I think, from Friedman, and we'll get back to the subject in a second, is if you have government, there's only so much you can do to minimize the corruption. And that's what you want to do. You want to make government as small as possible, and then you minimize the corruption. You're going to have a certain amount. See, the thing is, what they didn't point out with UNO and charter schools, they're not really like private entities. They're sort of quasi-public private entities.
They're officially part of the public school system, but they're operated outside of the collective bargaining agreement.
That's my point. So they're doing something better. They're getting better results. There's a certain amount of cronyism, perhaps alleged, perhaps going on with UNO. There's a certain amount of cronyism in the traditional public schools. The question for the Sun-Times, the headline for the Sun-Times, you guys over there, Sun-Times? Oh, you got that, okay. Chicago Sun-Times. Here's the Sunday's headline. This should hurt everybody. This is the best they can do in terms of gun control. This is the best they can do about violence and somebody being killed who is innocent and shouldn't have been, okay? This is the best you guys can do. And then you have this stuff about UNO, and you never ask the question, and here it was, which is producing better results? No, John, I'm not for cronyism. I'm not saying it's fine. But given you're going to have a certain amount with traditional public schools, and you may have a certain amount with charter schools, if one outperforms the other, you say the hell with it. At least kids are learning how to read in the charter schools at a greater rate than in the traditional public schools. And they didn't ask that, and they should be shut down. Well, shut down is too strong a word. But the point is, Chicago Sun-Times needs to get with it. You know, treat your readers like they have some intelligence, really. Enough of a rant on that. Okay, back to the main thing here, back to our main point, which was, so you've been talking with Ralph, you've been on Chicago Tonight, and you've been talking with the public about state employee pension reform. He's been talking about state employee pension reform. Your point is, you got to get to the root of the problem. As Milton Friedman would say, you got to be a true radical, get to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is reform the whole system, go toward 401ks. But if you dealt with the theory of the second best, any good economist would know that, if you couldn't get to the 401k, would you then say, even though you advocate for that, and I understand, you're a believer, it's a principle, but if you couldn't get there, would you still say, well, at least increase employee contributions, increase the retirement age, freeze the COLAs for maybe 10 years, and then reduce the COLA after that? Would you still say that itself is an improvement of the current system?
Those are all excellent things that should be discussed as part of a solution. Okay. But the key point is you have to, as I said the other night, you have a simple problem. Spending is rising faster than revenues. And as long as you have spending rising faster than state revenues, you're going to have a problem. Some people think the way to solve that problem is by increasing revenues by creating more tax targets on taxpayers. I think that's insanity. We're losing the fight. Look what's happened since the January 2011 tax hike, Governor Quinn's signature achievement. Since that time, at that time, unemployment in Illinois was 8%. Unemployment in our surrounding states was 8%. Today, our unemployment is 8.7%. Our surrounding states are down to 7%, right? 8.7 versus 7. So the tax hike didn't work. More of the same would be a mistake. What we have to do is slow the growth of spending. That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. And the way you do it is have reform in education, reform in Medicaid, reform in state employee pensions. So you're saying don't look for line items to go whack, whack, whack. Try to philosophically
major reforms in the structural drivers of structural overspending.
Okay. And this has actually been the program and platform of Dan Proft when he ran for governor.
Well, I think we might hear from Dan again in 2014.
You think he might run again? Would you be supporting Dan if he ran for governor?
I'm not going to talk about who I support. I am here as a public policy
Because last time we were here, we thought maybe you would be running.
You thought maybe I'd be running. I, on the other hand, made it
not
quite clear
in 2014.
I made it quite clear I would not be running.
You didn't close the door
but
completely,
I think the field
you didn't close the door completely.
I think
2018. Are you Mike running in 2018?
You are so funny. All right. You are just so funny.
All right. Okay. Another thing that Ralph said at the end of the show, and it never got a response. So again, we're the cleanup. We clean up for these things. So at the
maybe
end
you
of that
should have had
show,
Ralph here today.
No, I'm trying to balance it out. I would love to have Ralph here. I tried to do that.
By the way, you haven't even mentioned Kristen McQuarrie from the Tribune, who was on, who did a great job on that.
You think so?
I think she did very well.
Okay, we'll come to her in a second. We only got about 7 or 8 minutes, about 5 minutes left. So, but this was an important point because Ralph made the statement, and I don't think it had a response. Was he said, you know, what we have to do is amortize, restructure the payments to the pensions, amortize them over a long period, like 40 or 50 years. He said, make them equal, and the state would save money. Ralph, do you have a response to that? I don't think you got to respond on that show.
Can I respond now?
Yes.
I'd love to. Ralph believes we should just reset the pension ramp on an equal payment over a period of 30 to 40 years, and that's the way. And the reason he wants to do that is because he wants to protect the defined benefit program. What that would mean is a massive transfer of future earnings of individual taxpayers into the coffers of the unions.
Big increase in taxes is what you're saying.
A big increase in taxes. And
how do you mean? What do you mean when he said save money? Do you understand that?
He's really talking about the fact that if you take and flatline the payments over a period of time, theoretically it would drive down the cost each year because you extend it out over a period of time. So if
the total cost is larger, isn't it?
If you owe $500 billion and you divide it over 20 years, that's a certain payment, and if you divide it over 40 years, the payment is smaller. That's all he's really saying.
Oh, but it's not payment. Well, you could present value it.
The key point is that Ralph wants to retain the current system, and he's looking for any way to possibly do that, including the progressive tax hike, which he is advocating, as well as resetting the pension ramp, which is a broken system.
He says you have to modernize the tax system and modernize the tax code.
Modernize means make it more efficient to take money from taxpayers who are already paying the ninth highest burden and are already paying the highest per capita burden they've ever paid.
But he would say, I think, and again, I'm trying to balance it out here. Because I think you and Ralph do the public a service by crystallizing the issue. And I don't think it was fully fleshed out in that show, which was a good start. That's all I'm trying to do.
These are very good things to flesh out. Here's the simple point when Ralph talks about modernizing. When he's talking about modernizing, that's code for more money from taxpayers in a adding in sales taxes on services, but not doing it in a revenue neutral way. He wants more revenue. I might entertain putting a flatter, broader structure in place, so long as we lower the amount of revenue being taken and put a revenue cap, a spending cap in place.
Ralph would say that shows your bias, your ideology, that you want to have less government. Ralph says what he wants to look at are best practices, database, and I guess he would say if it means more government to have a better overall solution, fine. If it means less government, fine. He would say he doesn't approach it with that bias. Isn't that what Ralph would say? And if he said that, what would be your response?
My response is the purpose of government is to protect individual liberty and let people pursue life, liberty, and happiness. That's what the founding principles are all about. And at the state government level, it should be the lightest hand possible. The coercive power of government reaching into people's lives when they run their business, they raise their families, they contribute to their communities, their churches, and all the civic organizations that people do. The problem is that he has a very expansive view of the government's role. It's very government-centric. I'm individual and people and community-centric from a cooperative point of view.
I want to thank John Tillman so much for coming here. Thank you so much, John.
Thanks for having me, John.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll. I think we've covered a lot of points, and I want to close with one very important one. Again, a dispute between you and Ralph, and you mentioned it here. You just said, I think, Illinois is the 9th highest in tax burden. Ralph said, no, look at the Tax Federation data, and it's 42nd. I think the difference is you look at per capita spending or per capita taxes. Ralph looks at taxes divided by disposable income, and when you take that, you do get a lower percentage. How do you defend your approach relative to
people spend money based on actual dollars, and so take a wealthy person and a middle-income person, a low-income person. All three of them are going to go buy if you can go into a store and get a better deal, all three of them get that deal, even though the burden is less on the wealthy person, right? Ralph does it as a percentage of income, which is distorting the way people actually make economic decisions.
And you close that show, and we didn't get to talk about Kristen McQuarrie, so we apologize. We'll have Kristen on separately, okay?
You should have her on. She's terrific.
I would love to have her on, and she's very attractive. Did I just say that? I didn't really say
I'm just sitting here, and you're saying what you're saying, and I'm saying what I'm saying.
I meant in the overall sense, okay. But you made the point on pensions. You know, you can't, he said, you're afraid they may solve the state employee pension problem, but then they're going to do nothing about the $54 billion underfunding in health care benefits.
They're actually advocating trading those out, which would be insane.
You're saying you got to cut those 54
all of it.
All of it.
All of it has to be reformed.
You can't leave
one alone. It all has to be reformed.
And when you say $200 billion in underfunding and others say $100 billion, are you adding in those health care benefits as part of the underfunding?
Our $200 billion